An outstanding soldier who became a king, but well known as a musician and also as a real friend. Yes, he had weaknesses also, but we can learn a lot from his life. Who is he?
History is meaningful if we learn from it. Technology changed a lot, but the basic human feelings and needs are the same. This episode part of a series which speaks about people who are mentioned in the Bible. Thanks for all who would like to support this channel. Please, if you can subscribe, or give a like, or a meaningful comment. In the description you may find other opportunities to support this channel. Enjoy.
David, the second king of Israel. The meaning of David's name is most likely beloved. What do we know about him? He was a shepherd, musician, poet, soldier, statesman, prophet, and king. Here are some of the reasons why he was so outstanding. He became famous on the battlefield. He showed endurance under hardships. He was a fearless leader and commander, unwavering in courage, yet humble enough to acknowledge his mistakes and repent of his gross sins. A man capable of tender compassion and mercy, a lover of truth and righteousness, and above all, who had implicit trust and confidence in his God. What we know about his background. David, a descendant of Boaz and Ruth, had an ancestry running back through Perez to Judah. This youngest of Jesse's 8 sons also had 2 sisters or half-sisters. One of David's brothers evidently died without having children and was thus dropped from later genealogical records. David's mother's name is not revealed. Bethlehem, located about 9 kilometers (5.5 miles) south-southwest of Jerusalem, and it was David's hometown, the town where his forefathers Jesse, Obed, and Boaz had lived, and which was sometimes called David's city. One example of it, Luke chapter 2 verse 4. It says, "And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David. But do not confuse it with the city of David, that is, Zion in Jerusalem." What we know about his childhood. We first see David in a field near Bethlehem, where he is tending to his father's sheep. Samuel sent by God to the house of Jesse to anoint one of his sons to be the future king. He had 7 older brothers. Finally David is fetched from the field. There is an atmosphere of suspense when he enters. He is ruddy, a young man with beautiful eyes and handsome in appearance. For until now no one knows why Samuel has come. "Get up," Samuel is commanded by God, "anoint him, for this is he. I have found David the son of Jesse, a man agreeable to my heart, who will do all the things I desire." David's years as a shepherd teenager had a significant impact on the rest of his life. When he eventually fled Saul's anger, his outdoor living equipped him to live as a refugee. He also learned to hurl slingstones and developed endurance, courage, and a readiness to follow and rescue sheep that had become away from the flock, even if it meant killing a bear or a lion. David as a musician. But, for all of his bravery as a warrior, David will be remembered as a musician who can play the harp and compose songs, skills he may have honed while caring to the sheep. David was also known for inventing new musical instruments. David's devotion to his God elevated his songs far beyond plain amusement to become classical masterpieces dedicated to praise. It seems 73 or more psalms have indicating that David composed them. Some, such as Psalms 8, 19, and 23, are most likely based on David's experiences as a shepherd. All of David's training as a sheepherder prepared him for the higher role of shepherding God's people. As it is said, Yahweh chose David his servant and withdrew him from the pens of the flock. David, on the other hand, did not abandon his father's flock in order to take the kingdom. He became the court musician on the advice of a Saul advisor, characterizing David as a valiant, mighty warrior and a man of war and an intelligent speaker and a well-formed guy, and God is with him. As a result, David was appointed as Saul's harpist and armor-bearer. David as a soldier. David later returns to his father's residence for an unspecified period of time for unknown reasons. He gets enraged when he sees and hears Goliath reproach while bringing provisions to his brothers in Saul's army, who is at the moment in a stalemate with the Philistines. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who has to taunt the battle lines of the living God? David wonders in 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 26. David inquires, Jehovah, who freed me from the paws of the lion and the paws of the bear, he continues, he it is who will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. With permission granted, the lion and bear killer approaches Goliath with the words, I come to thee in the name of Jehovah, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. Says the American Standard Version. David hurls the stone in his sling towards the enemy champion, knocking him down. Then David decapitates Goliath with Goliath's own sword, and he returns to camp with the war trophies, the giant's head and sword. These fast-paced events propelled David from the woods' obscurity into the spotlight in front of all Israel's gaze. When David returned after a successful campaign against the Philistines, he was met with dancing and rejoicing, with the popular song of the day being, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. All of Israel and Judah adored David, and Saul's son Jonathan made a lifelong friendship with him. Saul was envious of David's popularity, and from that day on, he looked cautiously at David. Saul tossed a spear at David twice while he was playing as he had done in the past, intending to pin him to the wall, but both times Jehovah delivered him. Saul had pledged to offer his daughter to whoever killed Goliath, but he was now hesitant to do so. Finally, Saul agreed to the marriage of a second daughter on the condition that David bring him 100 Philistine foreskins, a ridiculous demand that Saul calculated would result in David's death. David, on the other hand, increased the dowry and married Michal after presenting Saul with 200 foreskins. So now 2 of Saul's children had entered loving covenants with David, causing Saul to loathe him even more. When David was performing in front of Saul for the 3rd time, the king attempted to pin him to the wall. David left in the dead of night, only to meet Saul again in bizarre and unusual circumstances. David in the wilderness. For the next years, David lived as a refugee, continually fleeing from one location to the next, followed by an obstinate and ruthless king hell-bent on assassinating him. David sought refuge with the prophet Samuel in Ramah at first, but when that became untenable, he set out for Gath, stopping along the route to see high priest Ahimelech in Nob, where he got Goliath's sword. He was only able to get away from Gath by concealing his sanity by making childish crossmarks on the gate and having saliva trickle down his beard. David wrote Psalms 34 and 56 as a result of his experiences. He subsequently retreated to Adullam Cave, where he was joined by his family and roughly 400 unlucky and distraught individuals. His stay in this cave may be commemorated in Psalm chapter 57 or 142, or both. David continued on his journey, first to Mizpah in Moab, then to the forest of Hereth in Judah. When David discovered that Saul was planning an attack while he was living in Keilah, he and his troops, now numbering around 600, left for the wilderness of Ziph. From the wilderness of Ziph at Horish to the wilderness of Maon, Saul pursued his quarry from one location to the next. When Saul was about to seize his prey, word came of a Philistine raid, so for a period of time Saul abandoned the chase, allowing the fugitive to escape to En-Gedi. Beautiful psalms praising Jehovah for providing miraculous deliverance were born out of similar experiences. Saul went into a cave at En-Gedi to get away from nature. David, who had been hidden in the cave's back, snuck up and cut off the skirt of Saul's garment but spared his life, claiming it would be unimaginable for him to harm the king, because he is Jehovah's anointed. Following Samuel's death, David, remaining in exile, took up residence in the wilderness of Paran after Samuel's death. He and his men showed kindness to Nabal, a wealthy stockbreeder whose work was at Carmel, south of Hebron, only to be turned down by this jerk. Abigail, Nabal's wife, resisted David's attempt to exterminate the males of the household, but Nabal was struck down by Jehovah and perished. After that, David married the widow, giving him a second wife, Abigail of Carmel, Indiana, addition to Ahinoam from Jezreel. Saul had given Michal to another man during David's extended absence. David sought refuge in the Ziph wilderness for the second time, and the hunt was on once more. Saul and his 3,000 troops were likened by David to people looking for a single flea, exactly as one chases a partridge among the mountains. David and Abishai snuck into Saul's resting camp one night and stole his spear and water bottle. Abishai wished to kill Saul again, but David spared his life the second time, claiming that it was unimaginable for him to stretch out his hand against God's anointed one from Jehovah's perspective. David's last encounter with his foe occurred on this occasion. For 16 months, David stayed at Ziklag in Philistine land, out of Saul's reach. A number of powerful warriors abandoned Saul's army and joined the exiles at Ziklag, allowing David to invade towns of Israel's foes in the south, protecting Judah's borders and bolstering his eventual position as king. When the Philistines were about to attack Saul's soldiers, King Achish encouraged David to join them because he was a stench among his people Israel. The other Axis lords, on the other hand, rejected David as a security concern. Saul and 3 of his sons, including Jonathan, killed in the conflict that ended on Mount Gilboa.